In that case, I presume I'm audible, and let's start preparation. Thank you everyone for joining today's ecology morning session. Uh, so, what is it that we will be dealing today with? One is the previous week's assignment solution, obviously, and we are going to talk about. I will try to talk a little bit more about water pollution because last time we just spoke about groundwater, and then I will highlight two case studies of how different types of pollution will affect organisms in the wild, and how some of those concepts related to it with some case study examples, so that you can understand the effects of this on wildlife or fauna better, flora and fauna a little better. So let's get started with the assignment solution first. So in the meantime, if you have any doubts with respect to the assignment solution or need further clarifications, just do let me know. So the first question: areas around a core city or town, like a railway colony or university campus, lying outside the limit of the town is called. So when you're classifying areas on the position where it lies, whether it's in the center of the city or outside of the city, what's the term it is called? So these places are called outgrowths because uh, the centers they are not the center part of the city, but that's where the city slowly starts expanding later on. That might be the reason they are called outgrowths. The per capita water availability in India will see dash percent decrease from 1951 to 2025. So we all know that last time we were discussing about the decrease in groundwater levels and how it affects you know Earth, our Earth exists and all other different things. So this problem. So how much have we decreased in the past 75 years? So that is around 75% decrease. So that is really huge amount of water decrease in water availability. And it's not just the decrease, where our population is also increasing, so it's going to have a drastic effect on human health also, which is real concern. Going ahead, which of the following processes is likely to increase in extent as a result of urbanization? So which of these process are going to increase when because of urbanization happens? Precipitation, evapotranspiration, infiltration, runoff. The precipitation is basically rainfall. Is it going to increase? Very unlikely. Urbanization in most cases reduces precipitation because it removes most of the green cover. In most cases, there are always exceptions. Evapotranspiration is basically the amount of water that's going to evaporate and that's going to transpire by the plants. Infiltration and runoff. So the answer is runoff. Basically, talks about how much water that just runs off instead of getting into the ground, where it uh, fills up the aquifers. Instead of doing that, because urbanization, where we have most of this uh, top surface paved off, either by buildings or roads or pavements or anything, where we hardly leave any space for the water to sink in. So that's what will increase due to urbanization. Going ahead, the fourth question: which of the following is an example of water-sensitive urban design feature that promotes infiltration? So basically, which of these features, which of these following four features, which I will allow a lot of water, to go into the ground? Permeable pavements, pavements that allow water to go through them. Concrete roads, vertical gardens. You might have seen a lot of these vertical gardens where you grow gardens on vertically, and stormwater ponds. you have these huge ponds that collects this excess of water, that when storms hit, or there is huge amount of rainfall that happens in a short period of time. All the excess water is diverted through the storm drains to these storage ponds. So which of these four is likely to promote infiltration? Basically the lot of water being sink into the ground is a permeable pavement. So having permeable pavements can increase a lot. Can increase the recharge capacity of the groundwater. Which of the following socio-political driving factors? So match the following socio-political driving factors to the service delivery functions as per the WSUD framework. ABC limits to natural resources, public health, and flood protection. Drainage channels, dual pipe system, and separate sewage system. So, so which of we have to match these socio-political driving factors to the functions that are to be delivered. So, limit to natural sources and dual pipe system is one thing, and public health and separate sewage are together, and flood protection and drainage channels. So, for us to have proper public health, we need to have separate sewage system where uh, that can really help with the public health, and having drainage channels to drain most of the storm water or heavy rainfall water will help you protect from floods. And dual pipe system limits to natural resources. It's not the exact pipe system. It has a different meaning where, yeah. So that is with fifth question. Going ahead, the aquifer exposed to atmospheric pressure is called unconfined aquifer. True or false? So it's true. So that is exposed that experiences atmospheric pressure are called unconfined aquifer. So basically most of these rivers, lakes, ponds, these come under this category. What is the color of groundwater when it is contaminated with chromium leachate? So what will be the color of groundwater when when you have chromium leaching into the water? It's like when the chromium percolates to the different surfaces and then enters groundwater. What will be the color? So the color of the water will be mostly yellow. So if you see the groundwater being yellow, the high chances that it is chromium leachate. In situ bioremediation helps in converting the hexavalent chromium in polluted groundwater into divalent chromium. True or false? False. So hexavalent. So inside of bioremediation doesn't involve conversion of hexavalent to divalent. Based on geology of Chennai and Mumbai, which city would have more seepage of polluted water into the groundwater? Assume that concentration of pollutants in the water is same in both the cities. Chennai has more polluted groundwater. Mumbai has more. Both have same. Cannot be predicted. So thing is, based on the geology of rocks, Chennai has more polluted groundwater because the rocks are relatively more permeable for this water. So a lot of water, groundwater seeps into the water rain. Sorry, a lot of surface water seeps into the groundwater and thereby contaminates the groundwater also. And constructing toilets with improper septic tanks contaminates the groundwater more than open defecation. Okay, uh, it's true because uh, yeah, I feel it's in when we have improper septic tanks, there is a continuous seepage of the all these all these discharge into the ground from at a single point, while open defecation you know might not be able to seep that much because most of the times it will be consumed by other organisms, either could be insects or could be some other groups of taxa that might rapidly remove most of the you know most of the feces when compared to when you are closing and using the septic tanks, but you're not properly sealing it from the bottom, and that leaks and contaminates the groundwater. So in terms of groundwater, improper septic tanks contaminates it a lot than open defecation. So that's all for the you know previous uh, week assignment. So if anybody has any doubts or clarification with this, please let me know, or else uh, we'll move ahead and try to uh, understand a little more about water pollution. Okay, then I will move ahead. So last week I felt like I couldn't touch most much about water pollution. This might be a topic that you might have already heard of, but still I will touch down on the basics so that people can refresh them if you already knew, or who have not, who might not have heard them, they can learn those concepts again. Yeah. So if you see this backdrop image of this slide, what you can see is basically a river flowing around, and there are what appears like to be streams but are differently colored. So most of these streams are carrying contaminated waters from mines.
Sir,
Yeah, I,
hello, sir.
yeah, you're audible, please.
Sir, sir, which type of question is there in exam? NPTEL final exam 28th October.
Yeah, I just saw
Like
the message.
assignment.
I presume it has to be assignment type. I'm really not sure. Uh, I think we can just check that thing together after this session is done. If it's fine with you, I can see what the message was because I not completely read the message because I was busy with other things. Is that okay? If I'm not able to clearly explain to you, or other thing that I can suggest is, if your clarification isn't regarding the exam pattern, you can put it that in the question and answers session on the page, because I'm not the person dealing with these exams, because I don't know how those things work, so that the concerned person can help you clarify that. Hope that was clear. Okay, right?
Okay, sir. Sir,
Yeah.
I want to know that which type of question is there? Like assignment, multiple choice, filling the blanks. I am not talking about pattern of question paper, sir.
That thing I'm not sure. I think that even that thing you might have to ask. I'm not sure. Let me just check that. If we can check it in the end, and then while we check out the message or open it on the screen, we can just discuss about it. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, going back to water pollution. So what you see here is a river, and then all this pollution. This is the water that is being drained up from mines in that area, and eventually getting mixed up into this river, so eventually polluting the water or contaminating the water with whatever the metals or chemical metals it's carrying with. So it's not a new thing. We have been polluting water for a long time, and we understand that we pollute water, but we still don't stop ourselves from polluting water. That's the irony. So let's just try. See, uh, even after knowing that, we have very little amount of fresh water of all the water that we have, and very little water that we can really use for drinking, we still contaminate those, the even the tiniest percentage proportions of water that is, potable to us. That's the way how we have started thinking. Instead of, safeguarding the tiniest resource, we tend to overexploit it. That's the same case with water. See, we have very little amount of fresh water, still we we keep on polluting them. So what is water pollution? It's the whole definition can be anything, but broadly, it talks about a presence of harmful substances. Harmful substances either could be humans, it could be other organisms present on the in the environment, or the ones that are dependent on that water. So majorly refers to some sort of chemicals or some sort of biological entities, mostly microbial fauna or parasites. So that contaminate water body can be streams, rivers, lakes, oceans, or it can be aquifers. Degrade that eventually degrades the water quality and renders it toxic to the humans or the environment. So it's not, the water is no longer the water that used to be because of these harmful substances. So this is what we generally knew of water pollution as, because harmful substances, chemicals, microbes being added into the body. So you can't really use the water for the purpose that you used to do it before. And interestingly, the release of energy, either mostly in terms of heat in the form of radioactivity or heat into the bodies of water, can also be considered as water pollution, because you're essentially altering the environment there. What, let's say you have a hydropower plant, so let's just try to draw it. We have, hydrothermal power plant here, and there is a river that just flows like this. Okay, and the water temperature here, it was, river temperature was 25 degrees. This is a hypothetical situation. And what you do is, once in if you remember, these hydrothermal geothermal power plants, or sorry, coal fired power plants, or radioactive, that use radiation to, generate electricity. What they do, they use water to run the turbines. So once the turbines are steam, this generate steam by, heating it. Once the steam is cooled down, the hot water, after a while, it's not just pumped directly. They have some cooling ponds somewhere around here. After certain the temperature is certain value, it will release that back. In most places, this cooling might not even happen, or if the cooling system is defunct, the water reaches here at much more higher temperature. Eventually, let's say it rises the temperature to 40 degrees at initially, and eventually somewhere downstream it will go around to 25 degrees. So it is essentially altering the environment of the water from this stretch to this stretch, because the temperature is also changing. So this can also be considered as, pollution of water, because it's harmful for the organisms that are there. Similarly, uh, so those chemicals or microorganisms in most of the cases can be either those that are usually not found in water, like, you know some viruses, some bacteria that should not be found in water, but due to, if they occur in water, that's how it can happen. Or sometimes they occur in, they are present in higher concentrations than what they occur in naturally. Like for instance, the E. coli bacteria, generally they occur in certain concentration, but when there is sewage discharge that is happening into a water body, the E. coli bacteria, you know concentrations increases fi- much higher. So that's how it can also happen. So it's not only the new substances being added, the older elements in the water body can also be considered pollution if they're present in higher concentration. Even it's the same thing with, metals. uh, like, last session we were referring about arsenic, or fluoride in the water, which at lower they are generally present certain concentrations. But once the concentration get higher, we call it, the water has been contaminated with fluoride because it's high concentrations of fluoride. So yeah, that's the thing with water pollution, defining water pollution. So it's such a broad thing, and we can have, based on type of water, you can classify them also. The groundwater pollution basically refers to the pollution, polluting the groundwater or aquifers, underground aquifers, when these pollutants make way into the groundwater. Similarly, surface water pollution is where, most of the surface water bodies such as rivers, ponds, lakes get polluted. And marine or ocean pollution refers to the pollution of marine and ocean environments because of most release of these pollutants into these bodies. So what are the sources of water pollution? Let's say these can be, natural rocks, seepage and erosion. If you're talking about some chemicals that are usually present in water, started increasing suddenly. It can happen due to, seepage of increase in seepage of water through those rocks that carry with them the chemicals that, that are dissolved in them. It can be discharge, like the defunct septic systems that we're talking about, or it can be discharge of those septic systems directly into water bodies. It can be discharge of hazardous waste that leads to water pollution. Solid waste, like, most of the garbage, where that it end? It ends in the dump yard, obviously, but the dump yard is so close in most of the places to water bodies, so they eventually go into the water bodies. And petroleum products, for instance, oil, crude oil spills, so they lead to water pollution also. Agriculture, and agriculture is one such an interesting thing because, most of the agriculture is, it revolves around water bodies, and they are also one of the greater contributors of water pollution because in agriculture you have surface runoff that leads to, most of the pesticides or herbicides or other chemicals, fertilizers like nitrogen, phosphorus, all these fertilizers that we use in agriculture, they eventually run off if it rains heavily or whenever it rains, when the water body is so close to these agriculture fields. That leads to water pollution. We have injection wells where we purposefully inject chemicals into the ground, for storing them for long times or for other things that can seep into underground water and cause pollution. And there is obviously the surface runoff, whatever the water that, runs off after rains, that carries a lot of chemicals. And then the manual discharge, so all the sewage discharge that happens from industries or urban towns or any place, all these are, lead to pollution of water. Some of them can pollute all the different type, groundwater, fresh water and marine water, because they eventually end up travel from one to the another, or some are, different type of water, are specific to some context, like as in injection wells are just mostly predominantly pollute the groundwater systems, while agriculture or petroleum products can, uh, cause pollution mostly into riverine or, you know oceanic environments. So based on, uh, the type of water pollutants can be classified broadly into two categories based on, the way they are releasing the pollutants. It either they can be, either point source or dispersed source. So point source generally refers to, you know a source that has a single defined pollutant being, single defined source for that pollutants that are being released into the water. So basically, if you backtrack where all this pollution is, the pollutants are coming into the water, You can find a single source and point it out. See, this is the source of this pollutant that is coming into this water body, and this is happening at this point. Like for instance, industrial discharge. You have this specific huge pipes that discharge these things, some chemicals into them. So that's how you can pinpoint and find out. Even city sewerage discharge, they are all enter the water body at a single point, and you can identify that point properly. While a dispersed or non-point source, you know, has a much broader area and often unconfined, that discharge and it discharge variety of pollutants that enter the water body. So unlike a single point of entry, this has very wide point of entry, and not it discharge multiple variety of pollutants, and it's little difficult to find out what is the actual source of the pollutant. For instance, the runoff from an agricultural area is such. Okay, so what are the causes of pollution? We just talked about uh, just spoke about sources, and similarly the causes are more or less similar. There are few overlapping ones also. If you see here, agriculture, as we just discussed, most of the after it rains heavily, it just carries all the soil, and then the pesticides with it. So that's one region for pollution of most of the water bodies. And then we have oil pollution, where huge amounts of oils is put back into the environment due to s- some disasters or intentional purposes. It can be radioactive substances that are dispersed or radioactive pollution. You have biological samples or biological material, you know, that can cause water pollution, because what is let's try to understand what is biological material. So all the medical waste that goes from the hospital, if you are aware of, can be considered, those belong to the category of biological. Anything that is related to biological entity is biological waste. Okay, and most of these biological waste end up end up in bins like this. They are supposed to be autoclaved, where that can kill most of the living organisms in that waste, and they have to be in most cases had to be incinerated, so that there is nothing left of those biological waste. But however, that's not the case. That happens in most of the time, and then they end up in dumps like this. And then this biological waste eventually, with surface runoff, either end up into the groundwater or end up into freshwater bodies, and it causes a lot of health concerns. Especially microbial contamination. Biological waste can be a source of real microbial contamination. For instance, if you might remember from the COVID pandemic, you know, most of the time, uh, there have been methods devised, to understand what stage is a particular city or a town is in, it is in the COVID pandemic, where which part of the curve it is in. So how did they do? They use sewage water to determine the load of the virus in the sewage water, and then see it on the map, on a plot, saying that the stage is like this. So how did it come? Because it was because of the discharge from sewage by humans, and it can also go through this way also. So that's one way how biological waste uh, can cause pollution. So that is you are putting up microbes into the water. That is also that's pollution also. And then simultaneously you have solid waste that just get into water bodies, which is what we see generally. And most of these rivers that we see are flooded with plastics, and even the oceans. And obviously, the common one or the main one is the sewage that we pump directly. on a day on a day-to-day basis every time. Wherever we use water, it just ends up in sewage because most of it is hardly recycled or treated for the chemicals or pollutants. So that also is responsible for water pollution. And just let's have just there's the pollutants again. What are different types of pollutants? With viruses, bacteria, which are microbial pollutants. We have parasites that are pollutants. You know, that can considered pollutants, and even the fertilizers and pesticides that run off from these agriculturals or industrial waste. They are also a major group of pollutants, and even pharmaceutical products, nitrates, phosphates, which are not supposed to be present in that environment, that have been put up into these environments because of us, and similarly solid waste, such as plastic, or it could be any other thing. That's a form of pollution. Fecal waste, that is what most of the feces end into water. And we have radioactive materials that are put up into water body. So these are all different pollutants that we can have. Just going back again, since we are just talking about nitrates and phosphates are pollutants, so let's just have a look. Let's try to understand how does it affect. So agricultural runoff. So what does it do? Since in most of these agricultural fields we use a lot of fertilizers, and even if we don't use fertilizers, we might have pesticides or some other thing. So when it rains like this, and then you have this lot of soil, top layer of soil going on, all of the pesticides or fertilizers that were used, predominantly NPK fertilizers, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium fertilizers. So these end up in water bodies. So generally, these water bodies are limited by one element or another that keeps the balance of the the food, different organisms in harmony. So once you start, once this agriculture runoff ends up taking all those nutrients with them, that has been limiting different type of organisms in the water body. It just led them to they just explode when they have that nutrients. For instance, algae, you might have heard of algal blooms, that have huge algal blooms that might have happened. So that happens because most of the time nitrogen or either phosphorus are limiting in water bodies. So in those water bodies, when this agricultural runoff or industrial waste that has huge amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, ends up into a water body, either a pond or river or ocean, that leads to that creates a suitable environment where all these or microbes or algae can sustain, and then they cause these huge blooms. And these the amount or the size of these blooms have a detrimental effect on other organisms. Like most of these algae, when they are found in that much concentration, they are toxic. They release some chemicals at that concentration. They're toxic to most of those organisms, most of the fishes, or even mammals, because of the higher amount of toxins get killed. So that happens. And even in some environments, if algal bloom doesn't happen, there is huge growth of vegetation in the water, like Icornia, which is an invasive species, eventually might overcompete other native species, or some other plant might bloom. So that happens, and even some of those things can get accumulated into the fish, right? So that's how these pollutants are affecting these water bodies. So let's just talk about one such pollutant. I will try to talk about two such pollutants, one being oil and the other being plastics. Okay, let's just go about oil. Yeah, oil, what I mean by oil is basically crude oil. And you might have heard, that this crude oil is basically the liquid remains of ancient plants and animals that have been fossilized over years, thousands of years, and that's why they are also referred to as fossil fuels. And these are used to make wide range of fuels and products which we burn. It could be petrol, diesel, kerosene. These are some fuels we use. Are the products like plastics, polyethylene, or Vaseline, or this stuff, or these are some of the byproducts, even bitumen that is used to lay tar roads. These are byproducts that you get when you're refining this crude oil for fuels or some other things. You can have oil production that happens on the terrestrial because you get uh, oil on the terrestrial area, or you can have marine deposits of oil where you have to drill down thousands of meter under the sea surface to get to oil formations. So what happens is we end up spilling a lot because we are not. It's not like we are not careful. Even though we are careful, it happens sometimes. Here the oil spills refers to the release of crude oil or refined petroleum products. Most okay, so it can be water body or it can be surface land. This can happen either on the land or on a water body. So most of the reasons why this happened, uh, it could be due to refueling, while refueling, or leakage from some of those components of that stores these oils can lead to small scale oil spills. While large scale oil spills happen especially when these huge pipelines that carry oil across from source to refineries or refineries to consumers. So when that happens, there's a huge scale because it takes a lot of time to fix that leak again. If an oil tanker carries this huge volume of crude oil with it. When they sink, that will eventually lead to a lot of oil coming up into the environment. Drilling operations. So especially when you are searching for oil, that's what these drilling operations need by. So when you drill deep into the possible areas where you can find oil, and sometimes you might end up spilling oil when you are unprepared for some of those things that can happen during drilling operations. Or there can be sabotage where intentional involvement for you know for a weightage in some sort of other thing, like if the war is if in case of a war, you want to uh, destroy the moral of a company, or have a lot of effect on your enemy, so you might sabotage things. Or there can be pirates that can want to sabotage. So there are a lot of way it can happen. So these spills are mostly in marine environments. That's why I took up this example or this case. But they can also occur in land. If a oil tanker that you might have seen frequents frequency a lot on these roads, if it's going through a forested area, if some accident happens, the oil is there, put up into this environment if it leaks there. So it's not like it can't happen on the land environment. It happens on the land environment, but most cases it happens in marine environments. So here is this. This is what this is a satellite image of one of the greatest oil spills that has happened. So yeah, in US, it has happened in the US waters. So how does it harms life? Before we go for the case study, let's just understand how does these oils harms life. It can be humans, or it can be birds, it can be other marine organisms. So the first way it can harm is direct, direct physically harming a plant or an animal. This thing term is called fouling or oiling. As the name suggests, oiling is basically the covering of the whole body of that organism in oil. So how does it affect? You might like, so what? So how does it affect? So, for instance, if a bird is covered entirely in oil, it may not be able to fly because its oil sticks all of the components together. The feathers, they have to be spread out properly so that it can fly, and they also increase the weight and so on. So that's how it affects. And it also, if you talk about seagoing mammals or seagoing birds, you know, that stay mostly in the colder regions, that have dense fur, that major job is to insulate them. If they get end up in oil spill, if they end up getting a lot of oil on their fur, they may not be able to have the insulating performance of the fur. Although they have little bit of fat or blubber to insulate them, uh, the role the fur has is lost in most cases. So that can lead to deaths, lot of deaths in those species. And oil toxicity. So this is more of a direct effect where the components of the oils are themselves toxic to the uh, plant or animal. So because this is made of a lot of hydrocarbons, it can interact directly with the organisms and even kill it. So that's how these are the major two ways that it can affect marine fauna. So yeah, so let's talk about oil spills. How does this happen? So the, with the example of terrestrial oil spill, you know, in 1991 when the Gulf War was being fought between Iraq and Kuwait, where Iraqi forces invaded Kuwait. When the war, when the Iraqi forces decided to leave Kuwait and then they want to go back with their invasion, since Kuwait is comes on in the Middle Eastern region where lot there is a lot of uh, oil, crude oil that is present, oil reserves present there. So they had these wells that that they are extracting oil from. So what Iraqi forces did was left the oil pipelines open, and they set them on fire so that they want to do as much damage as they can do to the enemy. So these fires lasted 4 months, and then there is this huge oil spills that has happened. Somewhere around 200 million gallons of oil was also thrown into Persian Gulf. So just not land. So during this time, there's this lot of marine water pollution that has happened because of this oil spills. So yeah, similarly, let's talk about the worst marine disaster with respect to oil spills, the Deepwater Horizon. So this is this oil spill started on 2010, 20th April of 2010 in the Gulf of Mexico, which is in the southern coast of United States, southeastern coast. Yeah. So it was estimated, there's this some 21 crores amount of crude oil has been discharged into the ocean, and it is regarded as the worst or the largest environmental disaster in world history. When it, yeah, when you think in terms of the number of amount of oils that spilled, amount of organisms that are affected because of this spill. So what is? Let's just try to understand what has happened there in this spill. So the Deepwater Horizon spill, which is named after, is the name of a a drilling rig. So this is what a drilling rig looks like. You know, these are semi-submersible floating platforms that that tower up like crazy heights and weigh so much. The main job is to find suitable areas and dig into those areas and dig for oil. Once they find oil, they install those proper setup that is necessary to extract that oil, and then they hand it over to whatever the people different setup that is responsible for extracting the oil, and then they move on to find new places to dig. And this Deepwater Horizon rig has the capability to operate in waters up to 3,000 meters deep, which is such, such a high capacity. So what happened on 20th April when it was doing those drilling operations to find oil? This high pressure methane gas from the well that it dug rose into the drilling hole. So this explosion and exploded, which which ignited, and then the whole platform caught fire. Since this is the whole well is not properly fixed up and not set up properly, and the thing that is responsible for controlling it blew up, it led to the spillage of oil, and then that oil flowed for some 87 days, and then yeah, the huge amount of water oil has been spilled into the ocean. So these are some of the after effects of that spill incident. Like all the nearby beaches were covered in oil. As if you can see the marks of the waves, that has carried oil onto this beach. And yeah, there's a lot of oil that has been floating, that kept floating around the ocean. And these are some of the ships that were trying to, try to remove the oil from the surface of the water, and you know, try to remove it from that environment so that they can, fix them. So yeah, this was such a huge village, and then eventually all the wildlife caught up with this oil, and then they were affected. Like for instance, this green sea turtle is entirely, you know, smeared in oil. So even birds. So what did that, or what did US do? What did the people do? US and the people do to clean and recover from this oil spill? So they use different sort of methods. So one of such method is physical methods. So where you surround the slick wherever the oil has leaked with floating pads. So since most of oil is lighter than water and then floats on the top of the water, if you have something to surround around those oil slicks, so that can prevent them from floating around. So those structures are called floating dooms. They surrounded, and then that prevented from spreading. Once they did that, they use, in some areas they could, even they couldn't even use physical methods, they just use dispersants, so which are basically chemicals that break down oil into smaller particles. So since oil forms a huge layer, so if you add, when you add these chemicals, they break down the oil into tiny particles, so that the tiny particles can mix with water easily, and then prevent it from forming the huge slick that can affect the bigger organisms. So what does these smaller particles do is, they're easy for bacteria to degrade, or sunlight to degrade these drops, rather than having a single sheet to degrade. And the other thing they were that can be done when in a marine oil spill is for extracting the oil. So once, if you have proper apparatus, you can pump in the water that has been oil. You can extract the water and then separate the oil from the water, and then release the water back into the ocean, and that's how you can remove oil. So this is one such graphic, of how this thing works. So generally what happens when you know one of these wellheads break, or some leak happens, since the oil is much more lighter, it just rises up to the top and forms a surface leak. Okay. uh, and then it also moves around with the currents. If we add you know these dispersants at the bottom, let's say, it just breaks down the oil, these huge particles, into small particles, small droplets, and then this thing can dissolve much more and can be carried around, and then thus dissolve the effect, so that it can be easily degraded. While if it's a surface, when it comes to surface, No, you might have currents in some areas, but because this is a huge single thing, it gets really difficult for the natural degradation to take place. And this is how aerial spray of dispersants is done. These huge planes carrying this dispersant. So the thing is, we are trying to save from this pollution of oil that we did. And how are we achieving it? We are in turn putting up another set of chemicals to try to control the other set of chemicals or pollutants that we brought up. So yeah, that's a real irony where we are trying to reduce the effect of one by introducing a new effect. And the other thing that I wanted to speak about is plastics. Plastics as pollutants. Uh, Majorly these plastics are found in terrestrial environment also, but they have gone into aquatic environments like anything. So this is a small fish, you know, in its natural habitat, completely surrounded by plastic. They were supposed to help, right? These plastics were made initially to supposed to help us, but since they are doing the job, but they're not helping others. They're affecting drastically others. So we have the history of the plastics is so big. So they have been once after they have been discovered that as being easy to produce and have so many you know uses, and it makes our life much more easier. What was done, we started using plastics, use and throw plastics. We had a lot of use and throw plastics, like most of the carry bags, the straws, and a lot of other things. We had use and throw plastics, or even non-use and throw plastics. After a certain time, once the life is done, they're just thrown. So what happens is these plastics most of the time ends up into oceans, right? That's a one big dump yard for us humans. So once they end up into ocean, they just move around, go on with the oceanic currents. So, but these ocean currents have a regular pattern. They follow certain paths. They lead to different areas. So these patterns lead to what is now called as formation of these garbage patches. Now, for instance, one of the largest garbage patches, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So this is on the eastern coast of Japan and then western coast of Australia. These are one of these huge industrialized and advanced countries that have been most depend that have might have used a lot of plastics. And then when they end up into the ocean, plastics are circulated by these currents and then form these huge patches of plastic just floating around. And it's just not Great Pacific garbage patch. There are multiple other garbage patches that are formed because it's just not a single current. So there are many such currents, and another one is South Atlantic, North Atlantic garbage patch that are also formed. So some of these formations are also studied using buoys, where you have where researchers put a geotransmitter onto a buoy and just leave it. So this transmitter transmit the signals wherever it has gone every time. So most of those eventually end up in these patches, and that leads to congregation most of the plastic in those areas. Uh, is it a bad thing? Yes, but it also helps us. It also does these formation of these garbage patches. I feel helps us if you are really you know think of we're like let's just clean up. This is not how it should be, because the ocean itself is bringing all of the plastic together. We just had to go to the place, get rid of it. So I think that might be a way we can try. If we want to stop that, we can do it that way, I feel. So yeah, if you are interested, you can watch this video later on. So there is this organization called Ocean Cleanup, that is trying to uh, try to clean up this garbage patch and remove the plastics from the ocean, which uh, which you can watch it on YouTube. Yeah. And so, how does it affect marine life? Which you might have already heard of. One is, most of the animals get entangled in these plastics. For instance, this is a net, fishing net. We might have seen or heard of it or used it. So what happens after a while? Once a net starts breaking down or gets entangled in some stuff, some places, it may not be feasible for us to go and recover the net. So what we do, we just cut down the net or leave the net as such. So now these nets are called referred to as ghost nets because they are not operated by anyone, but still it's still catching a lot of animals into it. So that eventually die. Either they can die of entanglement. There might be, you might have seen other videos on the internet or some places, some photos where a lot of sea animals, it could be mammals, birds, that have been entangled in these plastics and have died. And the other way this affects plastics affect animals is through ingestion. So this is just a fish that has been dissected. All these microplastic particles, which is the basically the plastic brick and being broken down to small tiny plastic fragments, is being eaten by this fish. And then not only fish, the other organisms also end up eating plastics that are found in their environments. That eventually blocks their gut, and eventually the animal might die of either of starvation or other reasons also. So that's how this plastic can affect animals directly. So these effects are not only restricted to marine; they are effect similarly in the land systems also. The ingestion can happen in cows, elephants, rhinos, all these animals. And even entanglement can also happen. One such example of entanglement and deaths of animals is uh, is a string that is used for flying kites, right? It's currently banned. The Chinese string, I think it's referred to as. So that's made of nylon, which is a form of plastic. So most birds get either get hit into that wire and die of collision, or they get entangled and die. So yeah, if you just look at how many of different type of plastics are found in marine plastic debris. If you look here, polyethylene, which is basically what plastic bags and storage containers are made of. It's most studies have found lot of polyethylene in microplastic debris. Whatever the microplastics that are collected from ocean, most studies have reported polyethylene followed by polypropylene, which are bottle caps, ropes, gates, and yeah, and so on. This list just goes on. And yeah, so this shows little way of grim idea of the world, but some species have changed their habits so much that they sustain themselves these days on these garbage patches, on where we dump our waste. One such species is this greater adjutant. This is a scavenging bird that is found in more or less marshy areas or wetland areas. So this is where it is found in northeastern part of India, Nepal, and in Southeast Asia. So if you might have heard of this bird, or if you are from Guwahati, you might have seen this bird in Dampier, the Guwahati Dampier. They are found in such huge number. They are not found anywhere else, and they are just found in Dampiers. So that eventually, that increases the risk of the species. This is an endangered species, and this since they are living, sustain themselves from this environment, it also increases the risk of them, you know, ingest either the ingestion or entanglement or getting disease from this waste is so much. So yeah, so how it can affect them. For instance, if they don't end up dying choking of plastics, since they're eating a lot of waste, and those waste have a lot of chemicals, it can lead to accumulation of those waste across the span of its life. So that is called as bioaccumulation. So basically happens in a single organism over the span of its life. So what does it result in? It results in higher concentration of chemicals in older individuals compared to younger individuals. Simultaneously, biomagnification is also possible with a lot of these elements. This biomagnification happens when the chemicals are transferred across the trophic levels, and as these chemicals are transferred across these trophic levels, there is simultaneous increase in concentration of this chemical across the trophic level within the food web. So this results in higher concentration of chemicals in apex predators. So the same thing this image is saying. Just have a look at this. So by magnification, if you take this individual as an young individual, it has little amount of, you know, let's say mercury being the pollutant here. As it ages, because it has been exposed to that environment for a longer time, it just keep on accumulating a lot of it. So this is called bioaccumulation, accumulation within a single organism, single individual. While biomagnification refers to the increase in concentration of chemicals across trophic levels. For instance, this is phytoplanktons. Let's say pollutants such as polychlorinated biphenyls or PCBs. If they are absorbed by this microscopic phytoplankton, which are eventually eaten by zooplankton. So this comes into the fact that a lot of the higher tracts has to consume a lot of lower organisms in the lower part of the chain. They had seen that leads to an accumulation of lot of uh, these toxins in their body. So as these zooplanktons are eaten by fish, each fish might have to eat a lot of zooplankton, and then each orca might have to eat a lot of fish. So this leads to an accumulation of lot of the higher concentration of these chemicals into the apex predators. So this is biomagnification. So these the effects that a species has varies with respect to pollutants and the concentration that the species can tolerate. But yeah, this is how this accumulation and magnification happen. Yeah, yeah, that's all I have for today. Uh, I will just try to go over. I think someone has asked about how it can be done. This thing, I guess. Let me just see. Uh, what is the pattern of the exam? Let me just check the. Just give me a minute. So yeah, just a minute. Yeah. Uh, the type of exam will be available. So this is ecology and environment. So the exam is going to be online computer based exam. So let me just share that. So the exam is going to be online computer based exam, uh, that is being set, so the questions will be on the computer and the answers will be entered on the computer itself. So type of the questions include multiple choice questions, fill in the blank, and essay type. So yeah, you just have to enter it online itself. Just have to write computer based exam. So yeah, I think most of the questions will be either multiple choice or multiple answer questions or fill in the blank type as on true or false question, because that's what the pattern for the assignment has been. So I presume that's how it's going to be. But if you have any doubts with that, you can always go here and post your question, so that regarding exams, because if you have doubt regarding this, please put it here, because you are going to get a response as soon as possible. Okay, so yeah, so this is for some whoever has asked for that. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's all for today's session. Thank you for joining. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take. And I think the next session is going to be the last session for this course. So I just thought to ask if there's any topics that you want me to, cover specifically apart from what I have been covering. I will be happy to add concept or two, or try to cover those things in the next session. Okay. Seems like there is no suggestions. In that case, yeah, we'll stop here. That's the end of today's session. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Yeah, we can leave.